Okay. We are now recording. Hello and welcome to Welty at Home, the slow reading virtual book club that alternates works by Eudora Welty with works by authors connected to Welty. We are currently exploring Eudora Welty's novels, The Robber Bridegroom and The Ponder Heart. During this series, we will read and discuss about 40 pages of each book each week, with the 2-week break next week, September 23rd, and the following week, September 30th, with a final discussion comparing both novels on October 21st. I'm Anna Traylor, the education specialist at Eudora Welty House and Garden, and we are so grateful to Suzanne Mars, Eudora Welty's friend and biographer and professor emerita of Millsaps College, for guiding these discussions. Just some housekeeping. To comment or ask a question, click the reactions button at the bottom of your screen and select raise hand. If you're on a tablet or on a phone, you may have to tap the screen for this option to appear. A lively discussion often takes place in the chat, so be sure to glance over at the chat box every now and again as well. With that, Suzanne, where shall we begin our discussion?
All right. Well, we've just been talking with Liz Kambanga, who is in charge of the Welty collection at MDAH. And so we're going to try to line up for the future. Liz is going to talk about a little bit next time, maybe a virtual tour, if we can arrange it, of the Welty collection at the archive, so that if any of you do come to town and want to visit, you'll know the ropes a little better at the archives department. All right. I have 4 things I want to talk about today, and I hope I can get us through all 4 of them. And I think I'll start each of these discussion segments with quotations. And the first thing I want us to talk about, and we may never leave it, is the passages dealing with Indian captivity and with the murder and rape and murder of the Indian maiden in the novel. So let's look at 2 passages that came early in the novel that we didn't talk about before. If you have the Library of America edition, they're on pages 12 and 13. One is a statement from Jamie, who, after Clement has told him about the being taken captive by the Indians, he says, "How did they do it?" asked Jamie. "What trick did they use? The savages are so clever they are liable to last out no matter how we stamp upon them." And then Clement, and a little bit later on the next page, replies, "In their camp where we were taken, a clear, swept, devious, aromatic place under flowering trees, we were encircled and made to perform and go naked like slaves. We had to go whirling and dizzied in a dance we had never suspected lay in our limbs. We had to be humiliated and tortured and enjoyed, and finally, with the most precise formality, to be decreed upon. All of them put on their blazing feathers and stood looking us down as if we were little mice." So could we talk about this passage and what you think its purpose is in the novel or novella? Anyone want to start us off? I'm particularly interested in Jamie's calling the Indians savages, but then following that up with saying they're liable to last out no matter how we stamp upon them. And then with Clements saying that we were made to go naked like slaves, humiliated, tortured, and enjoyed, and finally decreed upon. So what about that language, and what do you think's going on here in this narrative? What is it setting us up for? Anyone? Beverly. Thank you, Beverly. We can't hear you yet.
Beverly, if you'll unmute. You have to tap the screen, maybe.
There you go.
Well, I think it's a reflection of the enslavement of African Americans, because Clement has slaves. There's reference to the slaves who worked the field. So this is a sort of, I don't want to say turnabout fair play, because but I think that if these were people who who spent a lot of time thinking about the situation that they just described, and it's the same situation that they visit on other people, on other enslaved people. I think probably Welty is making that point for us.
Yeah. So here he is objecting to the fact that they are made to go naked, to be humiliated, tortured, enjoyed, and decreed upon, which is what he's doing to his slaves. And at the end, we find out that Jamie and Rosamond have 100 slaves. And so this whole question of slavery and the abuse of slaves turned upon the white enslavers here. So it's the irony, which he fails to, which Clement fails to note, but which we certainly do note. Yeah, Jane.
No. Okay, am I muted?
No, you're good.
Okay. The thing is, I just want to contrast the ugliness of the language that Eudora Welty gives to Jamie and Clement concerning the Indians. I want to contrast that with the beauty of the setting of where they find themselves in that lovely forest. And she mentions specifically that Clement said they were taken to, I don't have my tablet onto the words, to a fragrant place full
a romantic place under flowering trees. Yeah.
Exactly. And it's just to show, I guess, maybe an ignorant point of view of Jamie and Clement as conquerors and trampling upon what is beautiful and what is natural. I think it's just due to their particular ignorance. And I don't know if later I have read the novel, but if later they come to a change in how they view the world.
Okay, we want to talk about that, whether how much change there is. Notice that Jamie calls the native people savages. So he's defining savage and civilized, but then he talks about how we stamp upon them. So the civilized behavior is to stamp upon people, I suppose. I don't know. John.
Well, this the passages remind me of just how we broke every treaty we entered into with the Indians, and that we removed them from the state of Mississippi, notwithstanding what those treaties said, and a lot of those negotiations were held along the Natchez Trace, and they happened during the Andrew Jackson administration predominantly, and I don't know if that's her point at all to remind us of that, but that's what this reminds me of, and so.
Yeah, no, I think you're right, John. I think it's important to point out too. So here is this bit of Mississippi history lurking here in the background. Yeah. Joellen.
I want to take us back to page 12.
All right.
Just after the section you read about Jamie calling them clever savages.
Right.
Next paragraph, Clement says, the Indians know their time has come. They are sure of the future growing smaller always, and that lets them be infinitely gay and cruel. He offers a kind of explanation for striking back at so-called manifest destiny, the future that they can see coming.
Right. Yes. Thank you. Pearl?
Yes. I just came in from gardening, so no picture today. I'm reminded again how this is a fairy tale on the Natchez Trace, and this is true to the fairy tales. If we read now in the late 20th century, early 21st century, there is an enormous amount of cruelty and bad action, bad behavior, horrible things happening in those fairy tales that Disney just glossed over. So we regain it. And so to have savage Indians and to have these sorts of having slaves, all of that is true to the moment. She's historically correct in those things, and we can gloss over them, or we can take note of them and realize that these were people with, definite faults, and we were raping the land as well as the people that were there.
Correct. Thank you. Harriet.
Yeah, I have two thoughts. One is about Salome and the doubleness of Salome, in the sense that I'm thinking about a moment in the text when she says, "We must cut down more of the forest. We grow twice as much, and grow twice as much of everything. For the land is there for the taking, and I say, if it can be taken, take it." So on the one hand, she is avarice and greed, and on the other hand, she is the force of settlement of the country. And I'm just thinking about the way in which America is a backdrop for everything in this fairy tale, and it's a very double place. But also, I happen to be on the same wavelength as you, Suzanne, because I did a text search of the word savage, and I found among, when we can talk about the later plot, but I found that the idea of Indian is constantly kind of fantasy of fear in characters. Rosamond, on the one hand, thinks that that there was a savage there, but it was only a deer. And later, it was enough to make her afraid, as if the whole world was circled by a band of Indian savages. And Clement thought he was brushed by a feather, such as savages wore, and he fights what he thinks is the savage, only to discover he's been fighting a willow tree and thrashing about with the willow tree. But the idea of Indian as a fictional, as a fantasy of fear, is embedded in a lot of the uses of the word savage in the text.
Yes, I think so too. Let's look at the Little Harp's encounter, destruction of the Indian maiden, and at Jamie's response to it, because this is also, because I think that if Jamie is paired with Little Harp, Rosamond is also paired with the Indian maiden. And so Rosamond, who does talk about savages, must see herself in the victimization of this young woman as well, or maybe fail to see herself in the victimization of this young woman. So on page 64, Little Harp says about the Indian maiden, after they've given her the black drink, after he's cut off her finger, and now I will teach her the end of her life, for that is the thing that comes here lacking, said Little Harp. And he threw the girl across the long table, among the plates and all, where the remains of all the meals lay, where they were left, with the knives and forks sticking in them, and flung himself upon her before their eyes. You have killed her now, they said, and it was true. She was dead. And then Jamie comes in, and he doesn't kill Little Harp. He doesn't know that this is not Rosamond. He doesn't kill him, but he throws him out of the house. But what do we make of all of this? What with Little Harp and the language of this passage, do you think? Anybody? What about, I will teach her the end of her life? Is that double in meaning, do you think? Is it, I'm going to teach her that it's now time for death? She hasn't recognized the end of her life? Or is it the end of her life is a sexual encounter? The purpose of her life would be a sexual encounter with Little Harp, that image of male virility. What do you think? Nobody besides me interested in this? Harriet.
So my way in, one line I wouldn't want to overlook is is, and for a joke, it was an Indian maiden. They put her forward as if she were Rosamond, and for a joke, it is that quality again of attitudes towards Indian. But the thing that interests me more,
Disposable, yeah, right. And Little Harp's bad judgment and not recognizing the difference, yeah.
but the scene interests me in terms of comic rape and real rape.
Yeah.
That is, I've thought about the way in which classic rape plots cast female sexuality as open to victimization and violation, and comic rapes don't. In them, women are successful in manipulating situations that threaten them, moving them towards female pleasure. And Rosamond's plot is a comic rape with Jamie. But I think Welty isn't content to give Rosamond the power to transform rape into love without making her and us acknowledge the reality. And the heroine of the story is fantasy raped, but her double, her counterpart, the Indian maiden, is spread on the table and mounted and killed. I'm remembering that in conversations when Robert Bridegroom was being dramatized, adapted for the theater, it often came up whether this scene should be dropped because of violence. Welty refused. And I'm quoting her now, "I feel murder and rape should stand, that the actual horror should be given simply and quickly, but no mistake." So Welty insists on balance.
This is actually, Harriet, from a conversation, a letter to John Robinson.
It is.
Third dramatization.
Although it's not just the only place. That's not the only place that it happens. But the place I'm quoting there is from that conversation with John Robinson. It's so interesting to think about them imagining this piece for the theater when it's so much about mistaken identities and complicated sexualities. But I just think that she balances comic rape with actual horror, and she doesn't want to let that go.
And to have it, she says, yeah. And that's exactly what Jamie is beating her, taking her forcefully when she would have given it. And here is the depiction of that. And Jamie probably, it seems to me, sees himself in Little Harp, and to kill Little Harp would be to kill sort of an image of part of himself, and he doesn't want to do that. Not yet, anyway. Okay, John, and then Jane, and then Pearl.
Can y'all hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. I think this passage and what happens to the Indian woman and what Little Harp does just shows what a sociopath he is. And because he drugs her, he gives her the black drink that's on the preceding page, and she fell over like the dead. She's totally drugged. She didn't, and then he cuts off her finger, and then he rapes her, and then he kills her. There's Little Harp has no redeeming value whatsoever, and I rarely have this, but I'm totally happy when Jamie kills him with his dart.
Right. And Jamie decides not to kill him twice before he finally does.
Right.
Yeah.
Jane?
Yeah.
I just want to say that this shows Jamie's, I guess he's still imperfect. He hasn't changed enough. He still doesn't love Rosalind. He treats her as a sex object, and he runs away because his feelings have been hurt. That I don't know, but he at this point in the narrative, he still does not care about her at all. And I'm thinking, my way of thinking of looking at this particular story of Jamie and and Rosamond is the story of Cupid and Psyche. And they still haven't reached a point where they can be together as an ideal couple. They're still, I guess, egocentric in their ideas of what is going on. And Jamie is still too much preoccupied with himself to consider Rosamond's feelings at this point in the story.
Yeah, Jamie says to Rosamond, you didn't trust me. You don't trust me enough. It's Cupid and Psyche, but love and the soul, but not here, really. These are two human beings. And he doesn't trust her. He doesn't trust her. He doesn't want a partner. He wants a slave. I think he does want a partner, but he can't admit it to himself. And he treats her as a slave. And so, yeah, Pearl, what do you think? And then Joelle.
I think, first of all, thank you, Harriet, for that passage where she insists on the realities that she has put into the story, same as she talks about the realities in losing battles later on, how she doesn't, look and see the dark spots. And this reminds me of how throughout the novella, she's balancing the duality of romance and reality. And everybody's playing back and forth with that. And I would say, for example, on 64, Little Harp threatens, it's not about the killing or about the loss of the bride or the Indian maiden. He says, I will speak out your name and cast evil upon it. Take him away, for I will not have him sleeping with me, reminding us again about the early passages about sleeping in the inn. It just means like, I won't have him in my house. But back where we were reading earlier on page 13, Clement has said, their contempt turned me free and put a sort of mark on me. There's nothing that you can see, but something came out of their eyes. And so this whole idea of these threats, this fear that Harriet again was talking about. So it's not about the killing that prevents Jamie from acting. It's about the fear of having his name, he would no longer be able to be this double sort of figure.
Right, yeah. It's a side of his own personality that he doesn't want to kill off yet, anyway. Yeah, and we're not sure he ever does. Joellen.
I just wanted to point out that in this area that we're talking about, we certainly have fairy tale structure all over the place, and this is near the center. Salome, we know, has recognized Jamie as the robber from the very early on. She sees a bit of berry stain on his neck. Little Harp recognizes him because he's only covered half his face. So it's gradually revealed. And then Rosamond, third, has the witch's brew to take it off completely. So there's a kind of build toward recognition, and it's like the third casket. Same thing with Rosamond. He rescues the wrong girl, Goat's sister. He thinks the Indian maiden is Rosamond. And finally, it is Rosamond. So it's like the third casket. You open the wrong one, the right one. And it's just really interesting to me how she did that.
I love that. Yeah. Let's look at one more passage before we move to something else. On page 77, when Salome is been captured and is going to be made to dance to her death. And at the bottom of 77, she says, the sun cannot punish me. Punishment is always the proof. Why, I could punish the sun if I wished, for I have seen your sun with a shadow eating it, and I know it for a weak thing in the winter, like all the rest of life. She would throw mud on the face of the sun, said the Indians, drawing their circle in upon Salome, and their hands lifting with their tomahawks, but not touching her. Salome only laughed the more. I can punish your sun if I wish, she cried. I will tell the sun now to stand still, and it will stand still. And she threw back her head and called, Sun, stand where you are. Then anger came over all the faces of the Indian and dissolved the weariness that was there, and up sprang the young son of the chief, bounding forward to the center of the circle, His hand went up for the first time above his father's, and he gave a command in a voice as strong as a buffalo's. You dare to command the sun, he cried, and you must dance for it. Then his father raised his arms too, and all the other savages spread their arms high like the branches of trees and moved inward. Dance, they said. If you dare to command the sun, dance. So Salome began to dance, whether she wanted to or whether she didn't. And the Indian chief said, if you stand still before the sun obeys you, and stand still likewise, it is death for you. And of course, it is death for her. So one reason I wanted to call your attention to this passage is it evokes a famous passage in American literature from Moby Dick. And my former student, wonderful education director for a time at the Welty House and now working at UMMC, used to tell me, you can't teach anything without mentioning Moby Dick. So here it is. Here is Moby Dick. And in Moby Dick, Ahab says, when he's, talk not to me of blasphemy, man. I'd strike the sun if it insulted me. I'd strike the sun. And here is Salome like Ahab. And so you may want to talk about that connection. But anyway, let's talk about this passage with Salome. Joellen, is your hand still up?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay, I'll go with Beverly then.
Well, it reminded me of Snow White, of the original Snow White, the Grimm's fairy tale, when the wicked witch / queen is made to put on hot shoes, and she can't stop dancing because her feet are burning off. And eventually she dances until she dies.
So Snow White?
Snow White and Grimm's fairy tale.
Snow White coming together here.
Right.
Yeah. Anyone want to talk about this? So it seems to me it's in a sense, it's, Ahab is this sort of personification, isn't he, of individualism run amok, of I will insist upon myself. I will not accept limitation. And here it seems to me it's in some ways Salome is another personification of American individualism run amok. And what does that involve? It involves raping the land. It involves taking more and more land that is there for the taking. It's greed, as Clement says, but she's going to do it no matter what. And it's the fisherman and his wife too, the wife of the fisherman who won't accept limitation, who always asks for more, and who finally has to be God and is struck down back to their poor beginnings. Yeah. Harriet?
Yeah, I want to match passage for passage, although it's an earlier one. And I'm just thinking about the trigger for these captures is the death of the Indian maiden. But it's also more than that. Clement says, the time of cunning has come, and my time is over, for cunning is of a world I have no part in. And then the passage that goes on is about America. A circle of bandits counts gold. I'm skipping a little bit. Slaves mount the block.
This is page 69, and it's the one I wanted to go to next. So carry it on to Harriet. You've done my duty for me.
All right, let me go on with it and say, slaves mount the block. Planter makes a gesture of abundance with his riding whip. A rope descends from a tree and curls into a noose. Salome, when they're taken, says the settlement has come and reckoning is here. Punishment and rewards are in order, and the Indians carry them all the way. I'm thinking about the ways in which the Indians are in this scene presented as agents of justice. It's a response to in Clement's mind, he's just set up the problem with America, and Indians are caught in that story as much as they are also responding to the death of the Indian maiden.
All right. Yeah. All around are the Indians. But look at that. A circle of bandits counts out the gold. A planter makes a gesture of abundance. A flatboatman falls back from the tavern door. A rope descends from a tree and curls into a noose. So the planter, the bandits, the flatboatmen, the pioneers, all equated with this sort of violation of the Indian maiden and the need for justice. And that notion that the American concept of manifest destiny, the concept of the individual reigning supreme without limit, all of those things are shown to have very destructive consequences here. Anyone? That brings us to the question of Clement. Is Clement the innocent man? Clement the innocent. The time has come, he says, and my time is over. For cunning as of a world I will have no part in. What does it mean to be innocent in this world? And how are we to view Clement, do you think? Do you view Clement sympathetically, critically, both? Beverly and then Pearl.
I think it's very complicated because he seems to be very good. He realizes his daughter's a pathological liar. And of course, at one point thinks that she's been cured of her pathological lies. But, even at the very end, he's asking her, is that the truth or did you make that up? When she tells him about the 100 slaves in the mansion and that kind of thing. He seems to be one of those people who just lets things happen to him. He's not proactive. He's married to a horrible woman. He sees the awful way that she treats his daughter, but he, doesn't intervene. I viewed him as, obviously he's successful because even at the end of the novella, he's got a sack full of money and head back home. But I viewed him actually as, if not totally innocent, maybe a little simple-minded. And one of those innocent people who is either too good for this world or just doesn't have the mental capacity to deal with it.
Okay, so this kind of innocence is a perplexing quality to some extent. Pearl, what do you think?
I see his innocence as a naivete. And back at the beginning where we started, he said, the text says, from the first, Salome turned her eyes upon me with less question than demand, and that is the most impoverished gaze in the world. There was no longer anything but ambition left in her destroyed heart. So his naivete is full of heart, and it's not just that he doesn't see evil. He also seems to think that there is going to be progress and that there will be hope. And it makes me think of the naivete of this sort for so many in the world of the wilderness, but also today, people who just, believe that everything's going to be okay.
Okay, Bill, what do you think? Oh, Bill, we can't hear you.
Sorry, I couldn't unmute.
There.
Well, the names kind of strike me here. Clement means mild, and it means merciful, I think, are some of the meanings for it. And then Salome reminds me of the dance of Salome from the when she asked for John the Baptist's head. And so, I do think the names stand out, and they try to tell you who the character is, if you will, especially for those two. Clement, I think he's willing to overlook a lot of stuff. I think he knows that first wife is the second wife, that the beautiful wife is this ugly wife manifested. and that his time for being in the wilderness is over. And that's what innocence means a lot of times. Somebody is home in the wilderness, and that wilderness he's destroying, and so is his wife, and it's being destroyed all around him. So maybe that's what it means.
Jane, and then Joellen.
I just am of two minds about Clement. First of all, because of his name and because of his actions in the story, and because this is kind of like a fairy tale, I think he is the innocent, the naive, who gets done to rather than wreaks damage in the world. Yet, on the other hand, I can't help wonder if he is not that silent who, because they remain silent, they allow bad things to happen in the world, despite they just don't act. So because they don't act, yet they know bad things are going on around them, they keep silent. And that just gives venom and power to those who are taking advantage.
He's complicit, isn't he? In fact,
Well, I think he
goes
must
out,
be.
Yeah, he goes out and buys the land that Salome wants. He gets the grant from the governor. He is part and parcel of all of this. And as someone pointed out, he's got a bag of gold he's taking back with him. So it's a kind of willful innocence almost, and not, well, I'll say more later. Joellen. Oops, we can't hear you yet.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can.
Okay,
Yeah.
sorry. Clement is the philosopher of the piece. He set out into the wilderness even before he met Salome. So he put himself out as a man of action, a man of the world, like Jamie Lockhart. But he's the one who's philosophizing, talking about doubles and this and that. But he also is the victim of conventions and gender roles. He has to marry Salome because they come to the river, where people will meet them, and they have to be married. And he assumes that his daughter needs Salome because she needs a mother. That stretches to include enslavement and all kinds of other things. But he's clearly a foil to Jamie Lockhart and the men of action, but a very successful one because he's bolstered by Salome. And that's right, doesn't act.
So yeah, his complicity and innocence is not necessarily a virtue here. I think innocence is crippling in a sense. To insist upon your innocence, to deny knowledge of the world, or act, or not to try to act upon your basis of the knowledge of the world, is not necessarily a virtue. Yeah, Anna.
Somebody this past weekend at BookFest mentioned that they found Salome to be a sympathetic character. They found that she has a case that can be vindicated. And I was wondering if you could speak to anything like that. You mentioned Moby Dick and Captain Ahab, and I thought that was just an interesting comparison.
Well, I do think we can see her as maybe, in a sense, if the Indians act against people because they have realized the violence that's been done to them, her selfishness, her self-absorption may be in response to the loss of her husband, this event. So there is that, although she's pretty vile, I must say.
I agree. She's an evil queen for sure.
Well, let's talk about the ending of the novel and what you make of the ending. So Rosamond finds Jamie. They get married, and their twins are born. And we have this passage at the end. So in the spring, Clement went on a trip from Rodney's Landing to New Orleans and was walking about. New Orleans was the most marvelous city in the Spanish country or anywhere else on the river. Beauty and vice and every delight possible to the soul and body stood hospitably and usually together in every doorway and beneath every palmetto by day and lighted torch by night. A shutter opened and a flower bloomed. The very atmosphere was nothing but aerial space. The very walls were sugar cane. The very clouds hung as golden as bananas in the sky. But Clement Musgrove was a man who could have walked the streets of Baghdad without sending a second glance overhead at the magic carpet, or heard the tambourines of the angels in paradise without dancing a step, or had his choice of the fruits of the Garden of Eden without making up his mind. For he was an innocent of the wilderness and a planter of Rodney's Landing, and this was his good. So holding a bag of money in his hand, he went to the docks to depart, and there were all the ships with their sails and their flags flying and the seagulls dipping their wings like so many bright angels. And as he was putting his foot on the gangplank, he felt a touch at his sleeve, and there stood his daughter Rosamond, more beautiful than ever, and dressed in a beautiful rich white gown. Then how they embraced, for they had thought each other dead and gone. Father, she said, look at this wonderful place is my home now, and I am happy again. And before the boat could leave, she told him that Jamie Lockhart was now no longer a bandit, but a gentleman of the world in New Orleans, respected by all that knew him, a rich merchant, in fact. All his wild ways had been shed like a skin, and he could not be kinder to her than he was. They were the parents of beautiful twins, one of whom was named Clementine, and they lived in a beautiful house of marble and cypress wood on the shores of Lake Pontchartrain, and 100 slaves, and often went boating with other merchants and their wives, the ladies reclining under a blue silk canopy, and they sailed sometimes out on the ocean to look at the pirates' galleons. They had all they wanted in the world, and now that she had found her father still alive, everything was well. Of course, she said at the end, she did sometimes miss the house and the wood, and even the rough and tumble of their old life when he used to scorn her for her curiosity. But the city was splendid, she said. It was the place to live. Is all this true, Rosamond, or is it a lie? Said Clement. It is the truth, she said, and they held the boat while she took him to see for himself, and it was all true, but the blue canopy. Then the yellow-haired Jamie ran and took him by the hand, and for the first time thanked him for his daughter. And as for him, the outward transfer from bandit to merchant had been almost too easy to count it a change at all, and he was enjoying all the same success he had ever had. But now in his heart, Jamie knew that he was a hero and had always been one, only with the power to look both ways and see a thing from all sides. Then Rosamond prepared her father a little box lunch with her own hands. She asked him to come and stay with them, but he would not. Goodbye, they told each other as the wind filled the sails for the voyage home. God bless you. Okay, and they all lived happily ever after? Is everything resolved here? Jane?
Okay, like I said, I view the story from the story of Cupid and Psyche, where in order to get to the end, the characters have to go through, they have to do tasks. When she distrusts her husband, she has to do tasks to get back with him. She's given this series of tasks, and in this story, Rosamond has to go through some adventures, some toil, some trouble, getting herself in all sorts of trouble in order to become one with what she wants to be in her life. And the boy too, the Jamie, he has to go through all kinds of trouble and turmoil in order to be successful in life and to realize that there is more than one way of looking at the world. And I just wonder, I think like a true fairy tale, it shows the importance of experience in a young life. You know, all the characters in fairy tales are young princes or young men of going out to seek their fortune, and they must go through trial and experience and hard problems before they can fully understand their place in the world. And I think that's what happened here in this story.
All right, I'm going to ask this another question then. Do you think they understand their place in the world? Have they been transformed? Is this happily ever, or is a good bit of irony? Is there irony here at the ending, do you think? Harriet?
I'm thinking now about Welty saying that that children understand irony from fairy tales, but I actually don't think this is a fairy tale ending. I mean, I think that we get the illusion. Welty manages to kind of have it both ways. It is all this doubleness that we've had throughout this story, and it's just still there. And now it's twins and but so I'm thinking about Jamie, who is the robber who's become a gentleman of the world, respected by all. But really, Jamie has just washed his face and called on the thief to help the merchant. And they have this enormous house with hundreds of slaves, and they're enjoying all the success. He's enjoying all the success he's ever had as a robber. You know, the fairy tale promise is that we'll exile evil at the end, but that's inadequate to her portrait of this ambiguous America where good and evil are not as distinct as fairies and ogres, and there's the appearance of resolution. There is a happy ending, but it's very ambiguous and very double.
I was going to say there's a song about Pretty Boy Floyd the outlaw, and about Pretty Boy Floyd being killed, but Pretty Boy Floyd says, "Some men will rob you with a 6-gun and some with a fountain pen." So here is the Jamie was no longer a bandit, but a gentleman of the world, a rich merchant, in fact. And so the outward transfer from bandit to merchant had been almost too easy to count it a change at all. So he has a different way of doing business, but you can rob people with a fountain pen as well as a 6-gun, I think. Yeah, and I think Welty is calling that to our attention. So, but I love your idea here. She has it both ways. We've got the happy ending, but here is this little undercutting of it. Pearl?
Well, we know that you find what you wish to find in a story. And so those that wanted to have a fairy tale ending, read all of that fairy tale ending. But then there are those that see this line that says, "But now in his heart," and heart's been mentioned so many times, everybody's heart. Jamie knew that he was a hero and had always been one, only the power to look both ways and to see a thing from all sides. So it just is confirming that he was right all the way along. And so, you know, he's just changed on the outside, or he's changed enough for the innocent Clement to be satisfied, and some of the readers who want fairy tales. And Rosamond, she is very satisfied because she has everything she wants, as including a little lie about the blue canopy. So she can still manipulate.
And including 100 slaves to take care of her. No insight has come that way. Yeah, Jo Ellen.
I like what Jane said about the tests that occur in the myths, the Greek myths of adventures, tasks, having to accomplish various things. And I also want to notice that this basically circles us back to the beginning. Even Mike Fink is the agent of Rosamond's salvation, getting her started to New Orleans. He's a lowly mail writer who tells her he's seen the ghost of Jamie Lockhart in New Orleans, and he was ruined because he was cheated. He was known to have been cheated of the 3 bags of gold and the trained bird by Jamie Lockhart. And though it just was his downfall in the world, but he performs tasks as well, and he ends up transformed back into his original glory. So Welty is doing all of that, bringing back Mike Fink, has kind of tall tales all throughout. And I have not digested this enough to figure out kind of what I want to do with this. But it also strikes me that Jamie has no past. Or quite what to do with that either. But it's right. We have a happy ending undercut. It's double.
And Jane is right. We've come to it through these stages. So this
Mhm.
answering these challenges. But yeah, at the end, when it says Jamie, I think Pearl is pointing to a real key passage here. Jamie knew that he was a hero and had always been one. He's not accepting the fact that that old Jamie was not the hero. So that we've got that under good. I also want to suggest that Clement is still complicit. Goodbye. Okay, you can stay here, but he's got his bag of gold. Goodbye, I'm not staying. And he's not doing anything to call attention to any irony at all. Yeah. Bill and then Beverly.
Well, I agree with the comment about Psyche and Eros, and it's been a story told by a lot of people. It's a perfect writer story, because she doesn't change. Did Eudora Welty change through writing this? And so what she's describing is describing the world any way you want, and you don't have to exactly change through that description. And Jamie's able to describe the world any way he wants. I was a robber, now I'm a merchant. Mike Fink was this riverboat guy, now he's a mailman, now he's a riverboat villain again. And Rosamund's able to describe the world she wants. She can lie all she wants. There's really not too much of a consequence for her. I think the most true thing that was said was that she burns every piece of meat she cooks, and she has cold feet in bed at night. So I think this is like a perfect writer story. I can create any world I want to. I can turn it on its head, and I can make it all right again. And here it is back to you. So
Eudora Welty once wrote, there is everything in great fiction but a clear answer. All right, Beverly.
I think in looking at the characters, the two that don't really change, as has already been mentioned, are Rosamund and Clement. Jamie's change is more or less superficial, but at the end of the story, he is a successful merchant instead of a bandit, a robber bridegroom.
And he's no longer a rapist.
Right, no longer a rapist. And Salome, of course, got her just desserts, I guess we could say. And what happens to her? Little Harp is gone. He was a despicable character. Goat did okay, I guess. He didn't change very much, but Rosamund's still lying at the end. She's still, making up tales when they suit her. Clement goes back to his plantation, and he doesn't realize what a sort of a wuss he is as far as coming forward and being an agent of change in any way. And so everybody does live. Everybody who's still alive lives happily ever after.
So here we've got Jamie, no longer a murderer, no longer a rapist, but not exactly the innocent that he would have us believe. We've got Rosamund only lying a little bit, and so Clement no longer evidently trying to rape the land, but still reaping the benefits from what he has. Harriet. And then Jane.
Thinking about that passage where Jamie says that he's the hero as he always has been, I was thinking about the language in the scene where he comes to dinner and he isn't recognized because he's Jamie Lockhart. He isn't recognized as the robber. As for Jamie, he's shone like the sun from cleanliness, youth, wisdom, and satisfaction. And that idea that Jamie has always been someone who thinks that he is wise and is satisfied and full of satisfaction. And shone like the sun, I think, was interesting since we have the challenge to the sun with the Indian scene.
Maybe he's a little Ahab like himself. Jane?
I don't think we can discuss the end of the story without going back to page 64. And I think here the irony makes itself absolutely plain. Well, it's page 64 on my tablet. He says, Clement heard goats cry floating out of the forest, saying, Jamie Lockhart is the bandit of the woods, and the bandit of the woods is Jamie Lockhart. And Clement is thinking as he's walking, and he says, what exactly is this now? For he too was concerned with the identity of a man and had to speak, if only to the stones. What is the place and time? Here are all possible trees in a forest, and they grow as tall and as great, as close to one another as they would ever grow in the world. Upon each limb is a singing bird, and across this floor, slowly and softly and forever moving, is always a beast, one of a procession. And here, it brings us to what you mentioned about the irony of things are always the same. Jamie was a bandit, now he's a merchant. In other words, he's still a bandit, et cetera, et cetera. It still goes on and on.
All right. Thank you. And Pearl.
Well, I would just accept what Suzanne and Jane have said, that we can't be complicit and think that he has changed. That would be as bad as Clement. Just because he's a merchant does not mean he's not a bandit. Just because he's married does not mean he's not sleeping with some of those women. So I just think that that's the unanswerable, but I don't want to be complicit and say he's a good guy now.
Thank you, Pearl. All right. I think we have come to the end of our time. Does anyone have last words of wisdom? I have to say, I really enjoyed reading The Robber Bridegroom again. I hadn't read it in a long time. And I wish I'd paid more attention to it sooner.
I would love to add, so one thing that it was in and they all lived happily ever after that you referenced me to. Welty says about fairy tales, how their character varies. Some have morals, some laugh in the face of morals, some are savage, some are merry, some are marvelously decked out, some plain. And I think that this, in like the doubleness that you guys have been speaking to, it has a sort of moral, but it also laughs in the face of moral. It does morals, it does both of those things simultaneously. I think this is a really spectacular
So
discussion.
one of the first things we hear in the story is that all things are double. And by the time we come to the end, we know that they are doubled and doubled again, I think. Joellen, final.
Speaking of being doubled and doubled and doubled again, it struck me that the agents who shake things up are the villains that have this, the ending that turns out as it does. That Salome instigates Rosamond taking the berry stains off. Otherwise, that would have just gone on and on and on. Goat takes his brother's head and puts it in the marketplace and calls it Jamie Lockhart, so nobody's looking for him anymore. And I mentioned Mike Fink. So all of these characters, I think it's Salome who wakes Clement up from his dreams, saying that it's being roused that gets things done in the world. And I think that point is kind of underscored here.
I love that. Thank you. Pearl, do you have one last thing to say?
Yes, Suzanne, you might have done this at the beginning of last week, but I missed it. Do you want to say a few things about when she was writing this and how it was fitting in with the Natchez Trace stories, and then submitted as a prize? I think, I can't remember, but do you want to say something about the composition, or did you already do that?
We did that last time, I think. So this was one of the first of her Natchez Trace stories, and it was then. Maybe you want to add something else, Pearl. And I said it was held out for separate publication and published in 1942. I also want to point out, and we didn't really talk about this, that it was a story that some people thought might have seen as escapist in the midst of the beginning of World War II, or publishing just after the beginning of World War II. But it seems to me that it investigates some of the issues that are part and parcel of the time in which it was being composed, and in which Hitler was coming to power, and in which this, assertion of self above all was having horrifying effects in the world. So, yeah, Joellen.
Nobody, I don't need an answer right now. I know it's 2:00, but I know I have not seen any dramatizations of the Robber Bridegroom, but I would love to hear just a little bit sometime about how they come off. I know there's a stage play. I think there's a musical. Is there a film even?
I don't think there's a film. There was
It's
a
been very
musical on
popular.
a musical on Broadway. Eudora Welty and John Robinson tried
Yeah.
to turn it into a film, but they
Yeah.
didn't manage to do that. And on Broadway, it was turned into a musical with the wonderful song "Two Heads Are Better Than One" about the harps. And Alfred Urey did the book, and Robert Waldman, I think, did the music. So that was done. And there's a recording of it. Yeah.
Oh,
Well,
Cool.
I'll look into some information about recordings or anything like that for us to include in the next newsletter and see if I can dig anything up in the archives about things like that.
great. Thanks.
Pearl, was that what you wanted us to talk about or not?
Yes, no, that was fine. There was a bolderized version published in Philadelphia Inquirer. I haven't read that whole thing in a long time, but it might be curious.
Yeah, it came out after the book, so it's in the Philadelphia Inquirer, but bolderized, as you say. So, all right. Well, it's been wonderful talking to you. I'm so glad we're back together. We're going to take a 2-week break, mainly for my sake, so that I can go traveling. But then we'll resume our meetings in 2 weeks. So I look forward to seeing you all then.
Good.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.